companies and what have emerged as the major areas of concern for companies, right? After the pandemic, things have changed a lot. Like the way companies are learning to work in a new way, and literally most of us had to rewrite the rules of how we work. Even at Lawsico, for example, we were a lot of our functions were happening online, and we're doing a lot of work online remotely, but not at the level as it is currently. We did not have this much work happening remotely, to be honest. And for example, in Lawsico, we always challenged to do like we were challenged when it came to doing sales remotely, right? We found it very necessary to operate a sales team from an office because we never managed to make it work remotely. But the pandemic forced us to really learn that. Good morning. Hi, Lakshmi. Good evening. I don't know where you are logging in from, but I am in Delhi today, and it is uh, 9:15 in the evening over here. So, good evening to you also, and to everybody else. So, it is truly like a life-changing situation, and while I used to live and work from Delhi, working from home and remotely working means that I could actually travel to Goa and work from there for the last 1 month. And although I'm back right now in Delhi and I plan to travel more after this. And this is possible because of a very different kind of reality that we are living in. Like, 7 months back, this was unimaginable. I couldn't imagine that I could go and work from anywhere in the world if I wanted. But now it is very much possible. And this is like, I just saw today that Microsoft announced that they are saying that their employees can work from home permanently, never need to come back to office. Similarly, I saw some other things. There's a survey of Indian employees where reportedly they said that while they're all very burnt out and they're experiencing a lot of challenges in working from home, most of them said that we want to continue to work from home. We don't want to go back to office. So it's a very interesting situation. But this entire work from home, as well as certain other things that are happening because of the pandemic, has uh, changed the situation drastically. Like how things used to be and how things are now are completely different. And there are a bunch of things that are different today. Like, for example, confidentiality, right? So how do we look at confidentiality at this time? uh, Confidentiality was easier to maintain when you could stay inside an office and work from there, right? So if you want to keep certain information confidential, it was much easier to do so within a confined office space, right? So if there are a lot of call centers where you are not pen drive inside, right? You're not allowed to take a pen drive inside the office, or you could not even take your personal mobile phone inside the office. Why were these things done? These things were done to prevent data theft or to prevent any kind of breach of confidentiality. But now these kind of physical things are not working, right? In a lot of cases, people were given devices that belong to the company, right? And you could only work in the device. A lot of law firms, for example, you cannot work on your own device. You cannot work on any software. You have to work on software, and you have to work on system that is provided by by the law firm alone. And even if you're working from somewhere else, you have to log into a software system which will ensure that kind of confidentiality, that no documents can be transferred, no documents can be copied, no documents can be emailed to even anyone. Okay, so this is very important, and this kind of confidentiality measures are in place. But now that is changing a lot because people have to work from home. So you cannot physically ensure that they are maintaining the confidentiality. What stops them from taking a screenshot with their mobile? What stops them from emailing it to their personal email account or to their friends and leaking it to a newspaper and all of that, right? So confidentiality is going to be a lot more challenging than it used to be in the past. So organizations are facing this challenge. Not only this, there are a bunch of other things, like how do you actually monitor the performance of employees? So just because somebody is saying they are working doesn't mean they are working, right? A lot of times people would be claiming to be productive, claiming to be working, but maybe they are not doing that. They are watching, I don't know, a movie, or they're playing computer games for all you know. This is happening, like a lot of students are doing this anyway, right? So you never know that whether people are actually doing their work. So how do you keep track of that, right? So do you actually start tracking them using softwares which is maybe they're recording the screen or other things, right? So this is and there are a bunch of challenges, and I'm going to tell you that what are the biggest challenges that companies are facing from the HR perspective, and what HR managers are also facing from that perspective, right? One definitely major issue is that hiring, performance management, and retention for remote work. This is a much bigger challenge, okay? Because the way you can hire when you are working in the office, and the way you need to hire when different. A lot of times now you are not even meeting people personally. Your hiring is done, right? So what is the basis of hiring, and how do you select people for hiring? This is a much bigger question, but at the same time there's a huge advantage that now you have access to a global talent pool, unlike earlier. So earlier you have access to a local talent pool, but now you essentially have access to a global talent pool, which is a very different situation compared to before, right? But at the same time, the question arises that if you're going to hire people from other countries, for example, right, then are there certain rules, or are there certain um, uh, you know do you have to comply to a different a set of rules or things? So for example, if you decide that okay, we are working from home anyway, so why can't we hire people from Bangladesh or Nepal or I don't know, Vietnam, or South, Eastern Europe, where you have a good talent pool and you might want to hire such people, but can you do that? Are there any legalities involved? Can you hire them as freelancers? Can you hire them as full-time employees? Would there be any kind of legal issue if you do that, right? So it's a very interesting situation that is arising out of work from home situations. Similarly, a lot of foreign companies have started hiring Indians. So they realize that if people are going to work from home anyway, Indians are ready to work at a lower price than somebody who's sitting in Europe or sitting in USA. So a company in San Francisco, or a company in New York, or a company in Berlin, company in London is finding it sometimes efficacious and very cost saving to hire people from India. And right now, saving money is important uh, for these companies, even for law firms for that matter. At least they're hiring legal assistants from India, paralegals from India. They're hiring salespeople there, and definitely they're hiring a lot of tech people. Like tech people, they used to hire earlier anyway, but right now hiring tech people is like, I mean, Indian tech people are getting hired in Silicon Valley, in Europe, everywhere. It's a big thing right now. Okay. So basically, what are the legalities of you hiring talent from another country, right? Do you have to pay them more? How do you manage the payroll? Do you have to withhold some taxes? Do you have to pay some taxes in that country? So there is no such restriction at all that you can't hire people from another country, but there may be compliance issues, and HR managers have to understand and figure out how they are going to do it right. Okay. Same thing for retention and performance management as well, because there may be, if you're hiring people from other countries, would their laws apply to you, or do you continue to apply Indian laws to those remote workers? So this definitely would be a major question, right? So these are challenges essentially which are entirely new set of challenges that a lot of organizations and HR managers are facing, and it is not going to go away anytime soon. And in my opinion, this can be giving, providing a huge advantage to a company which does it right, which figures out how to do it right. And from that perspective, the HR people figuring this out as to how to do remote hiring, remote compliances, this how to do it right would be very, very important. Okay. So any questions still here? If any of you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. You can ask your questions in the chat. The chat is open to all of you, right? So you can just post your questions or comments or observations here. You're most welcome to do so. Okay. All right. So productivity tracking and employee surveillance, right? So how much of surveillance is okay? Is it okay to put softwares in their computer that are taking screenshots every 10 minutes to check if they're working or not? There are AI-based software now, and a lot of these big software companies are doing exactly this. They have put in software that is measuring, are you spending time on Facebook, are you time, on instead of working, instead of working, are you just doing random stuff? So it starts analyzing how you're spending your time during work and start sending reports to your boss. So it's pretty scary, right? So but there are other questions, like maybe you're in sales and your calls are getting recorded. So in case of my counseling team and sales team, we actually know how many hours they have spent on calls in a day, because we have to track that through a software. And although we don't have a surveillance software or anything, but at least we get to know, we get the call recordings, because we have to ensure we at least have the call recordings of what calls they are doing. And it helps us to also naturally get to know how many minutes they have spent on calls or how many hours they have spent on calls in a day. And it's very important, but it is not no joke, because people will pretend that they're working, but if they're not working, then it's a huge loss to the company, right? In a physical environment, you could encourage people to work, you could actually track who is doing what. But when you are working in this kind of a remote environment, then the employee has to motivate themselves, have to stay productive. It helps a great deal if they know that they cannot get away without working, because otherwise, of course, if they're not working, very soon they'll be exposed by lack of results and lack of performance. But by that time, the company has also suffered and the employee has also suffered. But then, what level of surveillance is permissible? Okay, if you're collecting data about the employee, to what extent you have obligation of confidentiality? How do you protect this data? Who should be having access to data? Is it okay if a lot of people have access to data, or should you restrict it to some people? So there are a lot of issues related to privacy of employees that are now coming to the front. And so this will continue to be very significant and important, right? And similar things are there, like are your employees on the field, are they effectively using their time? And people already had a lot of softwares for tracking field agents, right? So if you have salespeople on the field who are going and meeting different places, or delivery boys, think of all the Amazon delivery boys, or maybe Zomato delivery boys, and so on. How are they working, right? How much time they're spending? Are they being efficient from going from one point to another point, or are they just spending time on the road? Have they been stuck in a jam? There's a whole lot of data, and this data is important to track and calculate, because only from that you'll know how to make your workforce or your ground workforce more efficient. And this is being done by AI. So collecting all this data and storing all this data throws up a lot of legal questions. Are you doing it right? Are you do you have to comply to any data? India already has data protection rules under data protection rules of 2008, under the Information Technology Act. So you have to comply to that. And also a new data protection law which has been proposed is pending in the parliament. So even that becomes very relevant, that how to not fall foul of the existing laws that are there, right? Then keeping data safe. Keeping data safe, like, right on the back of the employee issue that comes is that this is a data protection question, right? So if I have to keep data safe, then, under what law? Because we don't have GDPR. We have GDPR. Some companies have to apply to GDPR because you have clients in Europe, you have vendors in Europe, maybe you have. So then that's a different case. Or you're supplying services or products to companies in Europe. So then definitely you have to comply to GDPR, and then suddenly you have all this data protection liability. So how do you keep your data safe? Because if there's a breach of data, it can lead to a significant amount of fine. If there are negligence under GDPR, it can be quite expensive to pay a huge fine under GDPR. So this becomes a big concern for Indian companies. I am not aware of any Indian company which has been fined under GDPR, but it looks like only a matter of time till that happens. So it becomes kind of important that you start thinking about data protection in India, but at the same time, Indian data protection laws are also going to come. Now, when you're not able to keep your, it's there are ISO state standards for data protection, for example, and it's very clear as to how to keep data. I mean, this is a watertight place, in an organization. So few people have data, others are not supposed to be having it. So it was pretty clear and very simple earlier, but it is not so right now, because how do you? I mean, even if you're an ISO certified company earlier, now it is different because you suddenly have this limited um, ability to implement those processes. Because when ISO was giving you certification, they were looking at your physical environment. For example, nobody can enter the premises without an access card. So every access card that is given is tracked, and there is a biometric system, or there is an access card system through which we know who are the people exactly on the premises at any given point of time. So this was a very reliable way to track who's actually having access to data. So if access to certain data is, certain data, certain documents are stored in a physical file room in a law firm, then you know exactly who have accessed that file room in a given point of time, and you could have cameras and so on to even do further tracking to avoid any kind of breach of confidentiality or data theft. But now when people are all working from home, so they will be having their data will be with them at home, right? So you'll have to literally send a file to people's home. So your exposure of data to and possible points of leak is much more. So what people are doing essentially is that they are trying to do it online, and they are trying to give limited access to people and through certain software which controls access, right? So maybe, when you are working on your stuff, you cannot just log in from any given computer, but you have to log into a certain account from which you can access your workspace. So there are virtual workspaces software which gives you access to the data that you need, and you can't access it from anywhere else. Even on the documents that you're working, let's say you're drafting an agreement, it is only on that virtual workspace. And the moment you log out of the virtual, you don't have access. Like, you don't have the root access of that document in your computer. You can only make edits to it. So it's a very interesting situation, and people are trying to build softwares and use softwares that will limit access, but at the same time it is impossible to limit physical access to documents. So you have to sometimes give people physical access to physical documents, and in that case you have to provide infrastructure to the employee with shredders and etc., so that they can actually maintain confidentiality, destroy the document, and so on. And definitely HR managers, although you are supposed to have, if you are like the data officers and so on, the concept is there, but in reality most of the time the responsibility is coming on either the legal team of a company or on HR managers more often. Okay. Okay. And then there are other issues also. Like, imagine that you're having an official meeting people can record screen without telling anyone, right? If you have a Zoom meeting, they can simply record what is going on in the event, and then leak these kind of things. There are big risks, and there would be a lot of cases going forward where people would be leaking sensitive recordings from discussions, official discussions, and so on. But everything is pretty much on record these days. So the availability of evidence for building a case is always much easier, right? So definitely very important. The other thing that has become very important in light of this COVID and pandemic and lockdown, and also the economic recession that is happening, that laying off, pay cuts, and non-performing employees. This has become three large issues. So a lot of companies are shutting down. A lot of companies are unable to function. A lot of companies need to lay off some employees just to continue to function, right? So the question is that, is it allowed to lay off employees? Can you retrench? Can you fire people and say that, sorry, we can't pay you anymore at this time, so you need to I'm very sorry, there was a disturbance in my internet connection. Thank you for waiting for me. So yeah, so where I was, can you guys just quickly tell me that, till which point you got, because I don't know when this got disconnected. Anybody in the chat? Can you quickly tell me? Layoff, right. So layoff you heard. So there is a big concern that can you lay off people, and then what are the liabilities for that? What kind of compensation you have to pay, layoff compensation, or do you have to give certain uh, rights to them, or how does it actually work? So this is definitely something that people have to take a hard look at. Another work is obviously to retrenchment. There's a concept of retrenchment in the Industrial Disputes Act, and you have to see that if this whatever you're doing falls in the definition of retrenchment, and because there are certain rights that people have at the time of retrenchment. Okay, so definitely this is a very important thing to learn, and it's not difficult. Just Google this, you'll find the answers. I'm not going into it because I don't. It's a long discussion of layoff and retrenchments. Another big issue that is arising is related to pay cuts. So a lot of companies told their employees to take a voluntary pay cut. So voluntary pay cut works this way, that if I tell, nobody really wants a pay cut, right? So but if they realize that the company won't survive and I'll have to look for another job, whether I'll find it or not, I don't know. At least let's try to save this company. So a lot of times employees agree to a pay cut, and they agree in writing with the management that, okay, I am agreeing to take a 50% pay cut or 30% pay cut. I know there are companies where people have taken 80% pay cut also, okay? And they're like well-paid people. So they have agreed. A lot of law firms, big law firms, they have given 50%, 60%, 80% pay cut to partners of those law firms. Now that happens because people know that we have a good business here. This is a bad year. We have to survive, and next year we'll be back again, or maybe in 2 years we'll be back again. So they don't want to shut down the company or lose their position because of this. So they are willing to take a pay cut, and this happens in a lot of companies, happening in a lot of companies. And pay cuts, but it works through a agreement. Okay, basically you sign an agreement saying that I am willingly taking a pay cut, and it's up, I am fine with this. And when things will be better, there are two things that can happen. One is that the company reverts you back to your old salary, the other thing that can happen is that they also compensate you for the past pay cut that you have taken. And this is quite common. It happens in good companies, at least try to pay you also for the pay cut that you have taken and compensate you later on when things are better. So pay cuts are quite common, but it has to be handled sensitively. Documentation has to be there. Agreement has to be in place so that later on people cannot go and take the company to a court and demand compensation and allege discrimination, and a lot of problems can happen. Now, non-performing people can be a problem at this time. So there, you remember there were some uh, orders from governments that no, you can't fire people, this, that. Now, if you can't fire people, so if you're a non-performing person, you might want to take advantage of this, right? So how to fire a non-performing person in a time like this? Because if you fire them, they might go to court and say that, I was actually not fired because of performance reason, but because the company doesn't have money or company's financials are weak and so on. So how do you deal with that? So one very clear thing is that you must keep a record of the non-performance, right? So it should be there in emails, chats, whatever, because you're working remotely anyway. Likely there will be some trail showing that that person is not performing, is subjected to criticism, is subjected to, is told to improve, given directions on how to improve, maybe put on a performance improvement plan, and they haven't improved. And at that time, if you say, yes, this person is not improving and I want to fire, nobody will say no to that. But it should, there should be enough, kind of proof that this actually happened. Another major area of work for HR managers as well as employment lawyers is employment policies, because employment policies has to change because things have changed so much. The way people are working, the way they are reporting, everything. So for example, attendance policy, right? So you might have attendance policy that if you're late to work, then you'll have a half day or whatever. Now people are at their home only. So they're not late for work, but they might be taking too many breaks in between. Or let's say there is a policy for sexual harassment. So in this case, people are not physically meeting, so they are only interacting online. So what kind of issues may arise in that, right? So you have to address. So a lot of things may need to be changed in the employment policies that exist. Let's say there's a leave policy. Should it be modified given the situation? So many things may require changes, and it requires changes. In a matter of fact, when people are working from home, for example, data protection policy, right? Customer information policy, or all these things will need to change because people are working from home, and naturally, the rules are different now. The problems are different. The challenges are different. They're not the same as they used to be, 10 months back. So to keep in mind, and earlier people thought that, okay, things will be fine in 2, 3 months. We'll have to go back to the old thing. But now it's very clear that things are not going back to the way it was. There is more of new things, right? So given all the new things, most companies require a lot of changes in their employment policies, right? So, there are a bunch of employment policies. For example, social media policy. So many policies are there. So, and the policy is made a part of the employment contract by saying that you have to abide by the content of our employment policies, right? So that those employment policies then have to be uh, updated according to the new situation. Okay. Uh, so then there is a whole issue of the way the labor laws are designed and employment laws are designed, right? They were meant for a physical workplace. It never contemplated a workplace which is remote. So there are a lot of issues in there that can we maybe many definitions will have to be changed. How do we apply this law in a work from home context? How will judges look at things? So give you an example, if people are going to work from home anyway, should I be hiring them as freelancers? If I hire them as freelancers, then maybe I don't have to pay them PAF, etc. Right? So, but that brings down their social security and all of that. So then there are these questions that how will this work? And since and there are a lot of questions, like you say somebody got injured while they're working from home, right? So, but they were working while they were working from home. So they were in the course of employment. Does it mean that it is the employer's responsibility to pay for that injury or compensate them? Because earlier, if it happened in the office, the employer absolutely will have to compensate. But now that it is happening in their home, is the employer still liable, right? So these kind of questions will arise. And International Labour Organization has actually released a document on how employers should address these issues. I'm going to share that document with you so that you can have an access and go through it, right? So you can always Google this, right? It's work from home, ILO.org, work from home related guidance. Okay, so definitely go through this. It'll give you an idea of the kind of issues that are arising because of work from home question, right? Some of the questions that I'll tell you is that, one big question that they have highlighted. How is working from home different from teleworking, telecommuting, or remote working? So you can see International Labour Organization, which is a UN body, they're differentiating between work from home, teleworking, telecommuting, and remote working. Are all jobs suitable from work from home arrangements? Are workers obliged to observe the company's directive to work from home? Okay. What are the employees' responsibilities when implementing working from home arrangement in response to COVID-19? What are workers' responsibilities when working from home? How do you measure workers' productivity when working from home? What are the main challenges in implementing working from home arrangements? And what considerations should be made to address and manage them, right? Should working from home continue after COVID-19? So a lot of very interesting questions, and if you go through this, right, it's not a very long document, 30-page document, right? Out of that, I think 10 pages is frills, so 20 pages of solid content. I'll strongly recommend, if you are an HR manager, you go through this. It will make you think about things. And even if you're an employment lawyer or a lawyer employer interested in workers' rights, etc., definitely go through this. It will give you a bunch of ideas. Okay, so it's 9:45. I'm happy to take some questions at this point, if there are any questions. It is must to go through a conciliation officer before approaching the labor tribunal, even under these circumstances. No, it is not. You can go to a labor tribunal. Conciliation officer is different. That is an industrial dispute. Most of the time, if you're an individual person, and if you have an issue, you can go to directly to the labor, not tribunal, but labor officer. You can go complain with the labor inspector of your district. See, every statute have a different method now, but you have replaced everything of code of wages. So you have to see how it is recommended there, and you have to follow that. But the earlier method of Industrial Dispute Act, that you have to go to a conciliation officer and so on, that is not there anymore. So nothing to worry about. But even if it is there, you follow it. Whatever the law says, nothing has changed because of COVID, except the code of wages, code of social security, code of industrial disputes. All these are in place now, right? So they are passed. I think they're notified also. I'm not sure. Okay. Any other questions you guys have? So what are the other issues that you are experiencing or you can think of that is arising because of the pandemic, COVID-19? Any questions, anyone? Bhagya Lakshmi, Venugopal Rao, Virendra Singh, Rajiv Kapoor, Sandeep Bhatt, Sneha Borade, Uttam Das. Come on. Anybody? No questions? Damn. So another issue that, okay, if by mistake I take some pictures and record the audio of any meeting for our benefit purpose and that leaks, then can it have any legal consequences against us, even if our intention is not like that. So it depends, right? So if it is a civil matter, then intention is not so important. That you have caused damage is enough most of the time. You cause damage and then you have to compensate for that damage. Even in tort law, intention is not so important, right? So it's one of the basic tenets. But yeah, if it is a crime, then so if you're being accused of a crime, then intention is important, right? But at the same time, if it is under Official Secrets Act, for example, and you have done this, you still go to jail because even storing such data is illegal, right? And in certain cases, so for example, if you are storing some private images of another person or any kind of pornographic images of another person, just by that, even if you have no intention of doing anything else, it can lead to criminal prosecution because that itself is a crime. So you have to see are you talking about crime? Are you talking about civil offenses, some civil liability? What are you talking about? Since lockdown happened, employees were badly harassed by the company. So what is the question, Birendra? Like any particular question about this? See, employees are being harassed. I would say it's a difficult time for companies also, right? So companies have lost earnings. Many companies are facing shutting down because they are not able to perform, they are not able to survive, and they still have to pay people their salaries, and it is becoming harder to do so. So sometimes companies are just trying to survive, right? It's not they're intentionally troubling employees, but sometimes they're just trying to survive. And uh, there are companies which are taking advantage of the situation as well. So there are all kind of situations. We should not make judgments without actually looking into the facts of a certain situation. And of course, if somebody is misusing the laws or they are violating the laws, they can be taken to the court. It is possible. But people have suffered a lot during the lockdown. Just think of all the people, all the laborers who had to literally walk back to their state and all. They suffered so much and they didn't get any support from their employers. They didn't get support from government, sure, but even the employers in most cases did not or could not provide any kind of support. So people really suffered. So there's no question. But can they sue the employer for that? Maybe they can. We really haven't heard of such cases. But I think people know that employers are also really struggling. People are more focused on getting another job, getting out of this situation rather than going into legal fights so much. But there are legal issues that are arising. Okay. I want to know someday, but I came USA in some personal family work. That's why I didn't follow you. I didn't understand very well the question. Is there a question that you want to ask for Lakshmi? Okay, cool. All right. So if there are no more questions, I would love to receive your feedback. How did you find the session? 0 to 10, how much will you rate the session? Do you think there are things I could do better? Somebody is asking for my email ID. I could share it. ramanuj@ipleaders.in. Okay. Any other? So please do rate me. 0 being really bad, 10 being very good. How much will you rate me? 0 out of 0 to 10. Any kind of questions you have? Any topics you want to take up for my future webinars? Would love to know that as well. 10 out of 10. Thank you, Virendra. Anybody else? All right. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining me. Thank you, Sandeep. Thank you, Sneha. All the best, guys. Have a great night.